Mere abstention from physical violence will not meet our purpose. That's Gandhi, June 10th, 1939.
Here, Gandhi is addressing a common misconception, and it's easy to see why it's so common. Because it's fairly easy for me to refrain from striking back at somebody physically, but it is a very different matter not to harbor resentment and to keep my affection for someone alive, even when they're annoying me in some way or doing something which is frankly quite unjust, which is wrong. So that's why nonviolence is so challenging and why it actually leads to growth in the most meaningful sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea that many of the people that we work with in the activist circles and people who are doing peaceful work and nonviolent work and education in the world, very often they seem to get burnt out. And the reason for that is this quality within them has not changed. So the classical idea within Taoism is that something like peaceful action without a peaceful heart is like a tree without roots. It's there, it's upright, but it's not going to survive very long. But when your actions are coming out of a deep transformation that has occurred inside you, then it's just an ever emerging spectrum of love and peace and nonviolence that's being generated through your own heart. That it is a natural expression of who you are. And you actually become stronger and healthier as you do those things because you're expressing your truest nature. But if you are somebody who still harbors great violence in your own heart, if you're somebody who harbors great stress and tension about the world, and while feeling that stress and tension, you try to force a smile, for instance, of course we know that that's exhausting. Of course that drains us, makes us feel hopeless over time. But when we can do the work first to become people who genuinely express love and compassion, then those acts of love and compassion are natural from the Taoist perspective of Ziren. It's something that happens on its own. And it's not just a contrived action that other people can see that you're barely restraining yourself from lashing out or something like that. But rather, this is a genuine expression of your being. And the power behind that is tremendous.
Service is not possible unless it is rooted in love or ahimsa. That's Gandhi, Truth is God.
Of course, it's always possible to do things for people, but in order for that to become a real act of nonviolence, Gandhi is saying approximately two things. First, what you do for someone should be done without an expectation of reward. Otherwise it's just an exchange. And secondly, it should be done without a sense of compulsion. In other words, something that you enjoy doing for its own sake, because you recognize your unity with the other person. And sometimes it means that service, quote unquote, would be impeding a person, obstructing them from doing something that you know to be wrong. That's very difficult, but that's what makes the difference between sentimental romance and nonviolent love.
Again, I feel as though this is something that furthers the last discussion, that when it's rooted in something that's in your heart, in this case, in love and this deep quality of compassion and nonviolence, then what you're doing for somebody else is a genuine expression of that love. And it's an act of giving. And too often, people do things as a kind of virtue signaling, or they're hoping to get something back from you, even if it's just a boost to their ego or their pride or their image. Especially in this day and age of influencers and social media, everybody wants to be seen to be the one who's doing the good thing. And that sort of spiritual materialism doesn't do much good for anybody. And so true service, what Gandhi is talking about here, is something that comes from genuine willingness to give freely, without expectation, to be there, to be of service. And that quality of being, again, has a great power that's not found in small, piddling transactions, hoping to force change in the world or hoping to get something out of them. And too often the people that live that way, they don't even know that it's possible to experience the world in a way that is genuine and whole. And again, those are the people often that you should look to as needing the most help. And so if you hear somebody say, well, everybody is trying to get something from somebody all the time, perhaps they just haven't met the right people and they haven't looked inside deeply enough. And so I highly support everybody in their journey with their practice to look inside and discover that seed of deep-rooted compassion, that part of you that wants to simply be of service without needing anything back, and live and act from there, and the strength and the capacity of your good works will catapult.
The law of love will work just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not. Gandhi, The Nation's Voice, Part 2.
We're meeting this very basic law more than once in Gandhi's remarks, and it's worth repeating them because we so often in materialistic civilization lose sight of the fact that the non-physical world is governed by laws just as much as the physical world is. Science would not be possible if the outside world were not governed by precise laws that can be discovered, and you can do control and prediction and all the rest of it. But here in our materialistic civilization, it's harder for us to recognize that there are such laws in the non-physical world as well. This is so important. And most of them are very simple. As St. Teresa of Avila said, amor saca amor. Love begets love. There's a very simple law that operates in the non-physical world. But as Gandhi insisted, it is just as mathematical and just as predictable as the laws of, say, gravity, momentum, and so forth.
I've found it very helpful to test some of these laws that we're talking about here for myself, because it instills a kind of deep confidence. And one of the reasons to, for instance, examine history is to clearly look at the law that violence always begets violence, for instance. And you can see it happen continuously over and over again. And when you recognize that, you can see that also its counterpart, not really a counterpart, more the clear expression of humanity, that love begets more love. That quality of the universe is immutable, it's obvious. And so this recognition that these methods, these qualities of our nature, they really do work, can be really a boon and a boost to our confidence as activists and people looking to make change in the world. For instance, as a meditator, in Buddhist circles, one of the important qualities to develop is a clear understanding that the meditation is doing something, that it's making changes, that you can clearly watch these shifts happen. You see what's causing the problem. For instance, perhaps an attachment to a certain thought or process. And then you do the practice that's appropriate for that. And you watch slowly as that attachment loosens. And as the attachment loosens, suffering decreases. And if you're paying attention to that, you can see a one-to-one relationship. Oh my gosh, this is actually helping. And there are so many things in life that are like this, that if we just pay attention, we can begin to see that there is hope, because we're not simply doing something because we are wanting it, that's the world that we want to see. But that these methods, these tools that we're using are incredibly powerful and always effective. And as some of the great children's authors would say in the past, you don't have to take my word for it. Look around, pay attention, and learn, and you will see that what Gandhi is referencing here, the law of love will work as quickly and immutably as the law of gravitation, is something that we can rely upon.
I advise women to resort to civil rebellion against all undesirable and unworthy restraints. That's Gandhi from March 23rd, 1947.
It goes without saying that the law of nonviolence, being universal, should be applicable by everyone. And this would be a very natural application of it because, certain restraints had been put upon women by various societies for various reasons. And the way to get rid of them, Gandhi felt strongly, was through nonviolence. That's why he wasn't too attracted to the British suffragette movement when he was in South Africa, because their cause was just, no question about that, but they were using violent means to get justice.
Such an important point, that even in the case of a very worthy cause, that we still want to make use of the tools that are the most effective. And what we are positing here, what we are proving here through our work, is that peaceful and nonviolent movement that is generated through love and compassion, is more effective than violent movement. So it's not just a matter of restraining ourselves from violence, that's how it's often portrayed, of course, but rather we are learning to use better tools, to try a new way, to create a new story for humanity, so that we can all flourish without anybody suffering, which of course is the actual goal. And the method that we use, the tools that we use, are the result. So if we try to use violence to generate peace, which again and again we discover throughout history, does not work. We've been trying it for countless millennia. It's time to try something better.
Repression itself affords a training in satyagraha, even as an unsought war affords a training for the soldier. That's Gandhi from April 8th, 1939.
There is a misconception about nonviolence, a big one, and Gandhi is addressing it here, and that is that because nonviolence is a weak force, it would only work against a weak opponent. But Gandhi is saying, and has always said, the opposite. It's a strong force, and it really comes into its own when there is opposition.
I feel like this is a difficult one to talk about, because so often what we think of, and when we think of war, of course, is the suffering, is the pain and the destruction. And how can any good come out of that? Well, in this case, what I think he's talking about is that we are faced with those times anyway. But by putting ourselves into the thick of it, and only as thick as we can handle, by putting ourselves into positions where we are able to exercise our compassion and our love and our very well honed tools of peace and nonviolence, I am hoping that you're practicing with them and honing them yourself, rather than going to a war zone and trying them out for the first time. But by working with them, what we do is, of course, improve our ability to use them, but also we get to raise our confidence in them because we get to see them working. And at the same time, part of what happens during what we call the nonviolent conversion, when people who are being violent are instead held in compassion rather than reacted to with more violence, which is what they're expecting, a big change happens. And so one of the amazing effects that seems to happen during the use of peace and nonviolence is this spreading wave of love and community and all of the things that we're actually trying to create. And so our base becomes stronger, along with our confidence, along with our skill, and we reach out and hold the hands of the people who were once violence, in holding those patterns of violence in our community, and they become part of our army, so to speak, our soldiers of peace. And that is an opportunity that only comes during times of great strife and conflict. And again, as we say, may none of us ever experience those times, but unfortunately it seems all too often we are forced into them.
I am a humble explorer of the science of nonviolence. That's Gandhi from Young India, November 20th, 1924.
The attempt to put nonviolence into the category of a religion has led to a lot of misunderstandings. Gandhi addresses them frequently, as he does here, saying that it's not a faith system that you take on faith, but something that you experiment with in your own life and in the society around you. And this experiment goes on indefinitely, goes on for life. Remember, he titled his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. I've always thought that this is a really enlightening and wonderful way to characterize nonviolence.
Because even Gandhi was learning as he went. Because, of course, for so many of us, as we first fumble our way into peaceful activism, for instance, or the development of compassion within ourselves, we are trying to reinvent the wheel, not realizing that we have millennia of great teachers before us trying to lay down a path to make it easier for us to learn, for us to be more effective in our transformations of the world. And again, I'm personally very grateful to people like Michael Nagler, who spent their lives trying to show us, oh, look, not only is there a better way, but it's really well thought out. There are steps. It's better to take this step before this step. Don't make this mistake. As, of course, so often we end up making those mistakes and those consequences resound through history. But we can continue to take steps forward to develop this science of nonviolence.
A man who aspires after that cannot keep out of any field of life. Gandhi, from his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth.
If you really want to be nonviolent, you can't just confine it to one sector in your life, like saying, I'm going to be nonviolent with my family, but certainly not with the government, or vice versa. It's a universal law. It applies everywhere. And if you aspire to realize it in your life, you have to stop and think about how it would apply in every compartment of life.
And in how many ways it would benefit those various compartments of our lives. Because once we cultivate this quality of our nature, it's our nature. It's not a tool that we're using over here or over this. We're changing, we're transforming how we are as humans, and then expressing that in the world. And again, this is this transformation that we're looking forward to as peace activists, as healers in the world, because it is from that deep space within us that the medicine comes.
My 70 years' experience has taught me that the truly great are often those of whom and of whose greatness the world knows nothing during their lifetime. That's Gandhi from December 10th, 1938.
There's a subtle joke going on here because Gandhi was so famous during his lifetime, he's more or less not putting himself in the category of the truly great. But the point he's really trying to make is that when we have a deep, lasting, significant impact on the world, first of all, we have to be operating selflessly, so the attention is not going to come on to us as an individual. And second of all, what we do may not be visible in the short term. That's a big difference between the operations of violence and the operations of nonviolence.
So many of these discussions through Gandhi and Michael Nagler seem to pivot around this idea of becoming free of this incorrigible sense of self, this need to be something, to be recognized, to have things, to accumulate wealth, but also to accumulate name, to accumulate fame and prestige. And it's fascinating how simply a title for many people can be a reason to destroy a nation or to commit atrocities. And so part of nonviolence is becoming free of that quality of our nature, this need to be accepted, this need to be praised by the countless millions. And so often, the unsung heroes, as we often refer to them, are all around us. People who spend their entire lives quietly serving and devoting themselves to uplifting others, to uplifting ideals, and because they don't waste their time trying to become famous or marketing themselves, they don't become very well known. And I've experienced this even with my own instructor, Master Zhicheng, who doesn't even really want to be on his own website. He's the invisible Taoist. And yet he's well known, of course, in Taiji and Taoist circles as a great master. So it's often teachers of Taiji that will find themselves studying with him. So he ends up being the teacher's teacher. But it's not because of his own desire to promote himself, but rather because the rest of us are happily telling everybody else about him. And to me, that's the only useful or legitimate way to gain renown, rather than by, as they say, tooting your own horn, being out there paying advertisers to talk about you and trying to self-promote and market constantly to boost the brand of what you think you are. Because, of course, we end up then in this loop of people who prize their own ambition and their own ego above the people that they're representing or the community that they're trying to help. And it's a pretty easy trap, I think, for people to fall into.
Men generally hesitate to make a beginning if they feel that the objective cannot be had in its entirety. Such an attitude of mind is in reality a bar to progress. Gandhi, November 11th, 1940.
Connected with this observation is what I often call the Gita theory of action. That is that we are responsible for and capable to operate in the area of means, but we never have complete control over the ends. If we have done the right thing in the right spirit, to quote Gandhi directly, full effort is full victory, regardless of what the outcome may be.
The ability to recognize that the method itself is the outcome. As we say, the path is the goal. The journey is the destination. The point is what we're doing, not what we think we're going to get from it. That's often by modern psychologists labeled as a growth mindset these days, but it seems to simply be a healthy way to work with the world. And it stops us from becoming disappointed and developing burnout. From the Buddhist and Taoist perspective, of course, it frees us from certain qualities of attachment because, of course, an outcome the way we expect it to show up rarely to never happens in life, which means that we're constantly disappointing ourselves because the image that we have in our head is not the same thing as reality. It will never match reality. And so the lighter that we can hold our goals and expectations, the less and less suffering that we have, which is very important. And so often, again, as activists and do-gooders, we want to make sure that we're conserving our own energy and avoiding burnout. And so if you are expecting a carefully written letter to change the world, or that one activist campaign that you're part of, or that time that you did a really good deed without putting your name attached to it, somehow internally we have an expectation that it will change the world. And of course, in a small and direct way, it does. But it probably won't meet your expectations for a rapid shift toward world peace. And I genuinely have met a number of people that give up their good works, or they fall into a kind of depression or exhaustion and apathy because they keep feeling disappointed by the work that they're doing. But if instead they focused on the work that they were doing and the chance to do good and the opportunity to flex their musculature of compassion and to open their heart and to reach out and touch the community and to make the difference that they can in front of them, then they feel invigorated and nourished. And it's only that attitude of mind, as he says, so that it becomes a way to grow their roots and to nourish themselves rather than, as Gandhi says, becoming a bar to progress.
Has not the atom bomb proved the futility of all violence? Gandhi, March 10, 1946.
Someone asked Gandhi whether he still believed in nonviolence after the atom bomb, and he said he believed in it even more for this very reason. Look at the world that we live in now. That horrible weapon, has it brought us peace? It's brought us decades of anxiety. And the clearest proof, if we know how to connect the dots, that violence begets violence, extreme violence begets extreme violence. The only thing that will get us out of that cycle of violence is love in action, otherwise known as ahimsa.
When doing some research upon historical war and peace movements, I saw a collection of headlines from various newspapers and speeches and things from over the centuries that each time there was a great war, and this mostly focused around American and European wars because of the language they were written in for me, very often they were touted and held up as, quote, the war to end all war, the war that will finally bring peace. And when we dropped the bomb, speaking as an American here, when we committed this fantastic atrocity that lingers in the minds of cultures everywhere, it created this, again, short-term effect and has launched us into an age where now everybody's terrified of actual obliteration of the environment, of the populace, and whole civilizations could disappear from the map because of the introduction of this weapon of peace, as it was called at the time. And this kind of short-sighted, self-destructive cycle, humans have been on this loop now for millennia, and we never quite learn our lesson. We always have this short-sighted view that this time it will work, this time we'll be safe. And we have to be willing to try something new. Violence, as Gandhi says here, is absolutely futile And once we can take that into ourselves, then we can begin to look around for a better way. And there are better ways.
Independence must begin at the bottom. That's Gandhi from July 28, 1946.
If you really want to get down to the bottom, you're talking about what goes on in the heart and the mind of the individual person. To get political Swaraj or independence without people really liberating themselves from the forces of egotism and ill will would only lead to the loss of the freedom that has been gained. So Gandhi was challenged at one point by someone who said, "You're taking the word Swaraj. Swaraj is a spiritual term." And he said, "Yeah, I'm doing that deliberately because true, lasting political change begins at the spiritual level."
In this case, again, from the perspective of the modern listener, as words tend to change over time, I think that referencing the spiritual level as the bottom, as the beginning of something, the bottom as in the, like mathematically, we might say the lowest common denominator, the part of us that is associated with every other part of humanity, all the other sentient beings in the world, that's part of the world itself. Whatever that layer is, in this case here, we can define it as spirit. And we want to change those foundational aspects of our nature individually, but also culturally, dynamically, politically. We want to begin to shift so that every step of the way toward peace and freedom holds the seeds of peace and freedom in it. Again, you cannot try to move toward peace and freedom if weapons of mass destruction and economic enslavement are the seeds that you're planting along the way. You end up with the fruits of what you've planted along the way. And so recognizing that at the deepest layers of our being and as our communities, we must cultivate those most foundational elements in order to get the outcome that we're looking for.
All activity for stopping war must prove fruitless so long as the causes of war are not understood and radically dealt with. That's Gandhi from February 11th, 1939.
Since Gandhi said this in 1939 when war was raging, I'm happy to say that there has been a little bit of an improvement in the recognition that wars don't just drop out of the sky, they arise out of conditions of injustice, exploitation, disrespect, and so forth. And the attempt to stop war by treaties is fruitless unless those conditions are addressed. And as a matter of historical fact, I believe that the average treaty has lasted about 2 years.
Gosh, that fact kind of blows me away, that treaties do not last. Probably last about as long as whatever administration made that treaty. And the next one comes in, gets rid of it. Gosh. We need to understand the tools of peace in order to stop war. Because if we're using tools that are essentially useless over time, or they break down, they don't have any lasting effect, in this case they prove fruitless, it's because we are trying to work with the qualities of the warring nations that is malleable and impermanent. If we can start to understand what's causing the war in the first place and change those things, then we get lasting change. In the same sense that much crime and violence perhaps we can trace back toward economic roots and foundations, inequalities. And so if we solved those particular issues, then the outgrowth of the crime and violence that arises from that would be dealt with and healed. And of course, there's other issues as well that would need to be managed and to be healed and worked with over time. But until we begin to look at these foundational elements in war and violence and crime, there's no way for things to change.
The extension of the law of nonviolence in the domain of economics means nothing less than the introduction of moral values as a factor to be considered in regulating international commerce. That's Gandhi from Young India, December 26, 1924.
Here's where Gandhi had a great disciple in the late E.F. Schumacher, whose book Small is Beautiful and his next book, Good Work, basically applied what he called Buddhist principles, but they were very similar to Gandhian principles, to the domain of economics, where the theory that the free market, the open market, will take care of itself and regulate itself automatically has really proven not to work. And the necessity of keeping human welfare first to uppermost in mind is now gaining some currency. I'm thinking here of the king of Bhutan, who coined and works on what he calls the gross national happiness, and he actually has an index to measure things like that the absence of violence, absence of divorces, and so forth. And he meant that as a direct correction to the gross national product.
And it's been tremendously effective as well, because as we know, things that get measured get managed. And one clear drawback for the way that, at least in many places, we measure economic prosperity is that I can cut down an entire forest. I can level the ground of a national forest and repossess land from low economic housing spaces and send people out onto the streets. And I can do all of these things. I can even have great wars and tremendous loss of life. But if you look on the charts that measure that economic progress that they're interested in very often, all you see is benefit. All you see is growth. And so people will celebrate that, even though clearly there's tremendous loss and a lot to be grieved and big problems to be checked out and solved, because we're measuring the wrong things. But if we begin to pay attention to the right things, and this, of course, includes, in this case, gross national happiness, which includes the health of the environment, it includes the happiness of children, it includes opportunities for the future and access to healthcare and these very important things, none of that's being measured in most of these countries because the people who are benefiting from the current economic system don't want that to be the main source of attention. But if we simply shifted the parts that we were paying attention to, then of course, everything would begin to change. Because remember, that which gets measured gets managed.
If I could persuade myself that I could find God in a Himalayan cave, I would proceed there immediately. But I know I cannot find God apart from humanity. Gandhi, August 29th, 1936.
Traditionally, in India, there are 4 paths to enlightenment: meditation, work, devotion, and a combination of all of these. But Gandhi, who is unique in many ways, is really unique in this, that he was one of the very, very few that I know of in the long history of India who actually achieved enlightenment through intense work. I mean, he worked like nobody could believe, 15 hours a day for close on to 50 years. And when someone asked him, in fact, I think it was the American journalist, asked him, why don't you take a vacation? He said, I'm always on vacation. Very profound. It means all of this action was taking place through him, but not from him. Or as they used to say in the scriptures, God is the actor, I am only the instrument.
So profound. And from the Taoist perspective, again, very often it's considered important first to go to a place where it's very easy to come to stillness and to rest your nervous system and to slow your mind and to step away from attachments and greed and strong emotional reactions. Because you can put yourself into the middle of a war zone, but you may find it very difficult to become still there and to uncover some important truths, because again, the goal is to see things as they are, not to be caught up in illusion. And it's very easy to get caught up in illusion when you are surrounded by things that trigger strong emotions and strong mental activity. And so going to a space like a monastery or just a quiet space in the woods, a cave in the mountains, you find it much easier to come to rest inside and outside. And then you do the work to stabilize those things. And then slowly, once you are stable, you expand the sphere of your activity and the sphere within which you work in life. And you're a little challenged, and then you work that out, and now you're stable in this larger sphere. And you slowly expand out into the community, taking that deep peace and that nourishing way of life with you the whole time, which of course becomes great medicine for the community. And so I prefer that mode of being rather than throwing yourself into the middle of hardship. But again, from this Taoist perspective, eventually, once you do achieve that deep level of harmony and stillness, your job is to go out into the community, if you'd like to, and to wander around, helping and nourishing and taking up jobs. And there are a number of very potent business leaders and doctors and healers and martial artists and people of the world who have achieved high levels of attainment internally because they follow these paths. And there's a few different people I have in mind who have impacted my life deeply that followed this path. And so when you often think of somebody who takes up meditation, too often I've heard the complaint, oh, they're very selfish. They're just doing this for themselves. But if you think of it more like medicine, and you want to become healed before you step out into the world and take that compassion and healing with you, then it's a very different pathway because you're on the road toward helping. But just like becoming a doctor, it takes a little while to learn how to do that first.
I believe in the conversion of mankind, not its destruction. That's from the Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi, Volume 25.
Well, there you have it. Gandhi's unquenchable faith in the human spirit, his belief that it was accessible in every single human being, and that to destroy people in order to destroy ideas and systems was monstrosity, and all of political action should be in the direction of persuasion, not even coercion, much less destruction.
To be able to center our lives around what in Taoist practices we would call yang sheng, nourishing life, or this one yang, this warm, nourishing quality, so that your life becomes centered around that as your greatest tool, so that everywhere you go, you leave the space better than it was, rather than extracting what you can from one place and then putting it into something else. You can move through your life in such a way that everything and everyone is better off than when you left it. And that becomes a way of being. And if you can treat your relationships that way, that within every conversation you want to leave the relationship better off than it was before, warmer, nourished, healthier, you're closer than you were before. Every single interaction, even the small ones. You can imagine what, over the course of years, those relationships turn into, what they become like. And if you treated yourself that way, oh my gosh, and it's possible. You do that with your environment, even just one room in your home. Every time you walk through it, you leave it a little bit cleaner, a little bit more the way you like it. What happens over the course of years? And you can treat that experience in that way of being as something that spreads through your entire life. And as you do that, then not only is the world made a lot better, but you yourself feel more and more amazing with each passing day.
Trusting one another, however, can never mean trusting with the lips and mistrusting with the heart. That's from the Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi, Volume 25.
I'm hearing two things here. First, Gandhi's really remarkable ability to trust and therefore to elicit trustworthiness in others, and his really kind of harping on the idea that just saying or acting well could be deceptive, could be hypocritical, and you needed to actually convert the heart to go along with it. And when your heart and mind and actions were all of a piece, you became almost unstoppable.
In Taoist practice, we refer to this as being Dunren, to be a real person. You are through, to use Tai Chi terminology, that from your source, energy moves all the way through your being through action without taking any sharp left turns or tying itself into a knot or getting obstructed on the way. Because your deepest impulses as a human, which come from compassion and love and this nature of connection and wholesomeness, that finds its way through not just your thoughts, not just the way you are in your body, but how you act in the world. And again, this is a nourishing way to live. It means you never get exhausted because you're always being your best self. And this quality of trust is a big deal. This ability to not just to trust others, but to be trustworthy yourself. To live honestly, not because you're holding yourself back from lying, but because that's your most authentic nature. These qualities can and should be cultivated.
The force of love is the same as the force of the soul or truth. We have evidence of it working at every step. The universe would disappear without the existence of that force. That's Gandhi from Hind Swaraj.
You know, physicists tell us that there are four basic forces in the universe, but Gandhi is telling us that really there's only one. It's not in itself a physical force. It is entirely positive. That was the wellspring of all of his incredible optimism and his effectiveness, that he believed that the underlying reality of the universe, of the human spirit, of even the material world that swirls around us, was entirely positive and aiming towards the ultimate goal of loving union.
This has been a kind of statement that I've heard a lot of confusion about over the years. And so my take on the idea of love as a fundamental force in the universe is that the universe's truth, the truth of the universe, is that everything is intimately connected to the point of being one, that it is one whole universe that functions and moves together as a single unit, as a single organism, in a sense. And that the most fundamental factors, the foundational truths of the universe, have to do with all of us sharing that same truth. This quality of wholeness, perhaps the quality of consciousness, that all humans experience this basic quality of consciousness the same. And in fact, the truth being that it's the same consciousness through everybody. And so that fundamental wholeness, that we all share this same qi, that we share the same world, that we share the same breath, even on the molecular level, it's clear that a breath that I am making right now will be taken up by every other person on the planet at some point in the future. And that's how interrelated everything is, even just at the physical level. And then, of course, at the more subtle levels, we become more and more a part of one whole. And the recognition of that truth, that when we find that truth in ourselves, we experience that as love. When I look at somebody who seems separate, but I experience the wholeness, the oneness of our experience together, the oneness that we are together, the experience in my body of that truth is called love. And there are a lot of other emotional experiences, physical experiences that we have as we interact with the truth of the universe. And love, the experience of love, is one of those. And I think that's one way of interpreting what he's talking about here. And that because we are interacting with a deep truth of the world, we now have access to the strength that comes from that truth, rather than operating under illusion, which doesn't have a great deal of power behind it. The deeper the truth, the greater the power to change, and the lasting and staying power of that change, because we're working with something that's moving with the universe rather than against it.
My life is an indivisible whole, and all my activities run into one another. And they all have their rise in my insatiable love of mankind. That's from a book, The Message of Mahatma Gandhi.
Well, there you have it. The man was motivated and driven by nothing but love. And at one point he says, I know this is a very tall claim, but I make it in all humility that I have ceased to hate anybody on the face of the earth. And that gave him the tremendous power to hate injustice without hating the people. That, I think, is really the key to Gandhi's impact on this world.
This quality again of what he calls insatiable love of mankind, again, is related to your capacity to witness the truth of the world around you. It's evident for everybody to see and then to experience in their body. And once you see it, as many people find, you can't unsee it. This sense that we are all in this together, not just in the same boat together, but in essence, we share the same being in that boat. And the closer you get to this revelation, the more connected you feel to your neighbor, that we're all essentially family. And whatever I do to my neighbor, I am doing to myself. Whatever my left hand does to my right hand, I'm doing to myself. And in the same way, if I'm cutting veggies and I accidentally cut my hand, my other hand comes over and grips it to stop the bleeding, and no one thinks, wow, what a selfless hand. What is that hand getting out of this? Because clearly, it's in the best interests of the hand to keep the body safe. And if we begin to see our communities like this, our world and environment like this, it becomes more and more obvious how important it is that we work together. And the feeling that comes along with that is very nourishing and often fiery and passionate. what Gandhi calls insatiable here. And it is something that can guide your whole life and bring great benefit to your whole community.
Non-cooperation is the quickest method of creating public opinion. That's from the mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
Once again, I'm seeing two rather profound principles here. One, that people in the last analysis will only be attracted to nonviolence. And two, that the key to mobilizing the vast human resources of India was simply to get them to stop cooperating with the British Raj. This was a profound principle that runs through Western political science as well, that domination can only be achieved by the cooperation of the dominated. Withdraw that cooperation, and their hold over you basically collapses.
I'm reminded of the image of a Thailand elephant, a huge creature, powerful, and it's tied up outside of a house next to a few scooters and things, and it is held to the ground in front of this house by a very thin cord, the kind of string you might use to hold a balloon or a dog leash, and this small stake in the ground that clearly the elephant just moving the wrong way would pull it out of the ground with hardly noticing it. But because that elephant had been held there its entire life by using this string, when it was small, it started off probably with the same cord holding it in place, and it was enough to hold it as a young elephant. And over the years, it learned that, I can't get away from this. And so it stays there until that cord is powerful enough to hold this elephant's mind in place so that it can't get away. And so much of life is like that for us because we're so used to being disempowered by being separated from each other, by lacking community, by lacking communal empowerment. We feel as though the people who have power over us, the people who are enslaving us or controlling our lives or doing negative things to us, we're so indoctrinated into the idea that we ourselves are powerless, that we take no action at all, because why bother? But to come to recognize that there are very few people standing over us saying that they have power, and the vast, vast majority of people, so vast that it's almost impossible to use a number that has any meaning. We can essentially say, mathematically, 100% of the people are disempowered by this fraction of 1% who claim to have positions of power, claim to have the right to tell people what to do, to enact violence, to drop a bomb. From the point when someone says, drop that bomb, there are so many people involved in having to make that process happen along the way, most of whom are disempowered and not treated very well. Their willingness to say no is enough to stop the entire process from happening. When a company is empowered by a union, which is just to say they talk to each other and say, hey, are you being treated badly? I'm being really treated badly as well. Let's stop letting them treat us badly. Let's stop working until they treat us better. That's all it is. And then the company is forced to make a difference because they're the ones actually doing the work. They're the ones contributing the labor. They're the ones creating the product. They are the company. And so the more unified, the more we talk to each other, the more we recognize our personal and interpersonal power, change can happen very quickly.